February 2nd.
Yep.
Mr.
Can somebody just crack the door a little bit so we get some crossback?
Mr. NPD.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not talking about patients, so.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to be live in 3, 2. All right, we're now live. So welcome to our Night's Watch discussion. The film to analyze will be Groundhog Day. So where do you want to start?
Start with some narcissistic personality disorder at the beginning of the movie.
So this is Phil, I assume?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So general idea of narcissistic personality or narcissistic personality disorder. Somebody provide me the definition. Well, actually, let me take a step back. Let's talk about what the 5-part definition of a personality is, right? So, and I'll start us off. The awful news is that in many classes, undergraduate classes that you've taken, depending on your theorist, you're going to have a different idea of what personality is. That's the awful news, right? So it starts with Freud, and then there's everybody up until 2026. The great news is that the American Psychiatric Association has incorporated the easiest of those 300 theories and ideas. The American Psychiatric Association defines personality across 4 domains, published in the DSM. The bad news is that these 4 domains are nearly impossible to remember, right? So before I give it to you, I'm going to ask the group if anybody has any guess as to what the 4 domains of personality is, as per the definition from the American Psychiatric Association. Number 1, cognition. Cognition. Somebody give me the layperson's definition of cognition in as much as it defines personality.
Like your general pattern of thinking.
Yeah. Way back last century, there was a theory that we were largely products of our environment, right? So we interacted with our environment. We interacted with the different stimuli in our environment. We had responses to those stimuli. So action is a reaction. And those responses that were reinforced were strengthened, and those that were punished weakened. And at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, during your lifetime, through the life cycle, you kind of constellated different traits that became your personality, right? General idea, that was behaviorism. One issue popped up where there was the observation that monozygotic twins, so identical twins that were reared in the same environment, turned out to be different people. So the behaviorists took one on the chin. We really couldn't understand how that could possibly be with the straightforward theory of behavioral medicine or behavioral theory, and therefore we had people like Albert Ellis take center stage and pose the idea that maybe it isn't the straightforward SR theory in terms of stimulus response theory, but maybe the stimuli are processed differently by different people before they respond or before there's a response. And the SR theory evolved into the SOR theory, where the O stood for the organism's cognitions, right? So the cognitive processes resulted in different responses that then were either punished or reinforced, right? And now we can make sense of how SIBs or identical twins, monozygotic twins, raised and reared in the same environment can turn out to be so different, right? So that's cognition. Right? Any questions about cognition in as much? And again, believe me, usually Psych 101, abnormal psychology, we spend a little bit more time on this, but that's the 3-minute primer on the first domain of personality, cognition. Other domains.
Behavior, maybe?
No, not behavior. Close though. Give me an example, more specific. So you're not wrong, but that's more higher specificity. Impulse control, which is exactly what it sounds like, right? How quickly do people behave or act on a thought? Or do they think before they act? Impulse control. Two more. Affectivity or affective control. And the fourth and final is interpersonal functioning. The APA says that if these are the four domains that define personality, deficits in two of those four spheres then define a personality disorder. If blank, you can fill in the blank with any one of five things. So go for it. So
It's not induced by a substance.
it's not substance induced. Good.
It's not better explained by another psychological disorder or medical condition.
There's three.
Pervasive across the environment and time.
All right, so you give me 4 and 5, right? It's pervasive with regard to a cross section in time, as well as being stable over time. And there's your 5. All right. The behavior identified is not due to one's personality if it is substance induced. If you were interacting with someone who is acutely intoxicated and you think they're being a bumhead, they are not a bumhead until they sober up and you observe that same behavior during a period of sustained sobriety. So you would rule out any potential role of substances. Similarly, anybody here a fan of the Saw franchise, right? What do you think of John Kramer?
I think he is probably one of my favorite villains, but also in terms of his ideology and the mindset of the way he views human life is very interesting, to say the very least. I won't get into it too much because it's not the movie, but
And for those of you who did not raise your hand, exactly what he's talking about when it comes to mindset is this idea that if you bring somebody to the brink of death and they figure out a way how to survive, you will change their outlook on the future, right? That incredible disregard for and violation of others' rights, putting them into these huge booby traps so they can learn from their experience, is consistent with antisocial personality until, spoilers, it is revealed that John Kramer is dying from a frontal lobe brain tumor, right? And all of a sudden, we have to consider that the general medical condition of a glioblastoma has changed his personality, right? Personality change due to glioblastoma in the frontal lobe. So that's medical condition. Mental disorder during acute illness, period, medical or psychiatric, we will not render a medical opinion on who a person is. So if somebody is depressed, if somebody is acutely manic, we will reserve judgment on who they are as a person. We will not be diagnosing a personality disorder. Those deficits that define personality, and there must be at least 2, must be also pervasive as well as stable over time. So there's your 5. Now that we know what a personality is and how to define a personality disorder, the next step is delineating which one. And I heard the word narcissistic personality. Now, 99% of the time, these personality disorders are taught through the 3 different clusters. And I'm not saying don't do that. What I'm going to ask you to consider to do, though, is in addition to that, you could rearrange these conditions into one of 2 categories. Those that adhere to a cardinal trait and those that do not. Because if you can look at the column where you have a personality disorder, and yes, narcissistic is one of them, that adheres to a cardinal trait, you're 90% home if you know what the cardinal trait is. Then if you go to your favorite text, if you go to your DSM and you look up the diagnostic criteria, they're not criteria there to memorize. They morph into examples of that cardinal trait, which makes them much, much easier to remember. What is the cardinal trait for the individual afflicted with narcissistic personality? They're arrogant, they believe they're special, and they believe they could be only understood by someone as special as they are. That's it. Is that Phil? Is Phil arrogant? Does he believe he's special? And does he believe that he could be understood only by individuals as special as he?
Yeah.
I would
You
say.
got a yes?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, so one final question, and we're going to add this to number 6 now, is what? It sounds like he has traits consistent with narcissistic personality. How do we now diagnose narcissistic personality disorder?
Is it significantly interfering or distressing?
And that's the 6th and final part of the definition of personality. And what's our answer for Phil?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. So
Why he
we,
developed so many defense mechanisms and stuff of that regard, because he wields his sort of beliefs of grandeur about himself as a shield.
great. Alrighty. Other observations about Phil. We'll stay on this character. And I'll give you a hint. I think what we might wind up talking about next is reason why I do not believe he's afflicted with narcissistic personality disorder.
He's forcing us to believe that he's reliving things over and over again.
So the first time it happens, and I'm forgetting what character he mentioned this to. It may be the owner of the bed and breakfast. That actually might be to Rita. I'm not sure, but he asks or makes a comment about deja vu, right? When deja vu becomes recurrent and clinically significant, what must the clinician consider? Right? Anybody here experience deja vu? You're fine, right? As a psychiatrist, normal, 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 clean slate of health, right? However, after pointing to you and saying that you're normal, you then disclose to me that no, this is recurrent and it's resulting in clinically significant distress and impairment in my functioning, doc. Kind of rescind my normal diagnosis, right? There's more to talk about, right? And in that discussion, I might mention a condition, which is called what?
Depersonalization.
Right? Depersonalization, derealization disorder. All right, so I'm going to give you 2 parts of the definition. The first part is really, really easy. Depersonalization, derealization disorder is a disorder defined by episodes of depersonalization and or derealization that are clinically significant. Right? It doesn't get much more straightforward than that. Of course, the second part is the question, well, then what is depersonalization? And what is derealization? Because if I have either and it's clinically significant, I may have a mental disorder. Well, depersonalization is the subjective belief that you are unattached or detached from your person in some way. Depersonalization. So the out-of-body experience would be an example of depersonalization. And if the out-of-body experience is recurrent and is causing clinically significant distress or impairment, you are likely going to be diagnosed with depersonalization, derealization disorder. All you need is one of them. On the other hand, derealization is the subjective experience of your immediate environment being unreal or in some way or being detached from it. And that's where deja vu comes in as an example. If anyone were to come in this room right now and try to report to us, try to tell us their story, that they feel as if they're reliving a continual loop of time, to the extent that it's clinically significant, to the extent that it's causing them distress, this might be clinically significant derealization, and therefore they may be diagnosed with depersonalization, derealization disorder. Just logged on.
Is that like another personality disorder?
No, it's actually a dissociative disorder. Like I'm back on again. Okay. Sorry for that glitch. All right. I'm going to now get into why Groundhog Day is one of the better movies to depict this. Right. Person comes in, they're seated right there, and they're giving us a history of present illness consistent with what Phil demonstrates through the, I don't know, 90 minutes or 90 days, whatever, of his experience. What is one question that, other than suicidality and homicidality, safety first, what is one question we're going to need answered sometime during our interview to really delineate the most likely diagnosis and the differential diagnosis? Why am I going to ask our patient, maybe we'll call him Phil, are there any gaps in memory? Why do I care?
No, you want to.
Is that could be indicative of associative amnesia?
Right. And why do I care? Other than it sounds really cool to say the words dissociative amnesia.
Well, because if he's having episodes that are in line with dissociative amnesia, that could be a potential explanation for why he why he could be coming to the point to begin with.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. If Bill had said yes, if our patient says yes, then the most likely diagnosis is dissociative amnesia. And the clinician has to appreciate that episodes of depersonalization and derealization are part of that. So our patient is not going to be rendered two diagnoses. Dissociative amnesia takes precedent. That is the single diagnosis when somebody has gaps in memory that is beyond which we would expect from normal forgetfulness, as well as clinically significant periods and episodes of depersonalization and or derealization, right? So anyone you're evaluating for depersonalization, derealization disorder, we have to assess whether or not there are gaps in memory, because dissociative amnesia is a must rule out. So let's say our patient says yes. What's our next step in terms of further formulation?
You don't have to idea.
Yeah. We have to assess whether there's a distinct personality state that takes over Phil's consciousness, because that would be the etiology. That would be the origin of those gaps in memory. And if that were the case, we don't just diagnose dissociative amnesia. This is dissociative identity disorder, and that would be the only diagnosis. Again, with the appreciation that dissociative identity disorder, or DID, accounts for those gaps in memory and dissociative amnesia, as well as feelings of depersonalization and derealization. So one single diagnosis would explain everything, right? Now, in a lot of movies that I've watched, there's a lot of several scenes, there are a lot of traits that kind of cut across these three diagnostic entities. It is exceedingly difficult to find a great movie that depicts depersonalization and derealization that doesn't depict a gap in memory, and it doesn't depict a distinct personality state taking over one's conscious awareness. Groundhog Day nails it, right? Because one of the things that I think is core to the plot is that he remembers, right? And there is absolutely no evidence that there's a distinct personality state that takes over his conscious awareness. He actually understands who is, his sense of self is never compromised. So very few movies can do that. But here's one that we can actually say is a fictional case depiction of depersonalization, derealization disorder. And even though we would need to consider both dissociative amnesia as well as DID, there's definitive evidence in this movie that neither of those are actually in play here. So your homework for the rest of the semester is to prove me wrong. try to find another movie where there's clinically significant depersonalization and derealization without evidence of any gaps in memory or evidence of DID, because it's really difficult to come up with a movie as good as Groundhog Day. So that's Phil.
If there's no external involvement, how would you differentiate dissociative amnesia from PID? Like if there's no one to be like, oh, you acted a certain way.
So I think dissociative amnesia is easier to do because you'll ask the patient, they could self-report whether or not there are gaps in memory. Right? I mean, assuming they're going to be reliable, right? That is not the case. Even as reliable as your patient may be or try to be, it's very difficult to self-report a change in mental status and a distinct personality state taking over their conscious awareness because by definition, they don't know. Hence why they're amnestic over the time or during the time that that distinct personality state is taking the light, if you will. So without collateral, it's very, very difficult. Now, one of the things you could do, but again, this doesn't really tease it out from dissociative amnesia, is ask them questions that would really support DID. Has anybody ever told you that your voice changes and you're kind of not there? And if they've told you that, do you reflect back, or at the time, did you reflect back and have gaps in memory about that period, about that day, about that weekend in which that occurred? So you could try to piece it together, but it's very difficult. And it's even more difficult because how extremely rare the condition is, right? So the numbers are a hindrance, and so quantitatively it's hard, and it's even more difficult qualitatively when you don't have collaterals to say, oh yeah, I mean, my sister, my brother, they weren't there for the weekend. They just were clouded over. They were like somebody else. And other observations about Phil.
He experienced a very distinct change in, I guess, personality, but like the way he carries himself generally.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think it's one of the interesting things to keep in mind when tracking his dynamic evolution over the course of the movie is his relationship with the woman that he was interested in, because I think that in a lot of ways that sort of revolves around his, like, what he's working towards and how he continuously messed it up and how he kept having to change day after day. Also almost going into like his sort of episodes, because he sort of lost touch with, like, started asking himself, like, well, what's the point if the day's just going to repeat? I might as well just do what I want. Going through those sort of almost episodes of, I don't really know the word for it, but
yeah, I mean, when he realizes what's happening, there's this sense of being vulnerable. But that then fairly quickly changes to depression, where he can't get out of the loop and he becomes dysphoric and even attempts suicide. So here we'd have to consider an adjustment disorder with depressed mood. And even though it's relatively rare for people with adjustment disorder with depressed mood to attempt suicide, it can happen. And that's exactly what happens in this movie. Again, I'm using big words. Let's pause and make sure we all understand the definition of an adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So generally speaking, what's an adjustment disorder?
Anna knows.
Sorry about it. So it's essentially when someone enters like a new situation or environment and subsequently experiences like a change in mood, potentially like depressive symptoms, anxiety.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Somebody presents with that history of present illness. As a clinician, we have to establish timelines. I mean, we have to understand now the APA's definition of cause and effect. So, and the way the American Psychiatric Association did this is that they actually established timelines so that we can say, this caused that, right? So what are the timelines?
It's like within the past 3 months, a significant stressor has occurred such that it changes your mood or functioning.
And once the acute stressor terminates, the mood does not persist for additional 6 months. Right? So we have a stimulus, we have a response / effect, and to operationalize causality, it must be within 3 months. We'd also expect that the mood in this case would terminate when the stimulus terminates. And there, the APA says 6 months. So it's very helpful to remember those timeframes. Right? Symptom onset, symptom offset, 3 and 6 months respectively. In the DSM, there are different subcategories of this. We mentioned in Phil's case, it's probably a depressed mood. You could have anxious affect, and you could have mixed emotions. You could have both depression and anxiety. You could also have a disturbance of conduct, and then you could have all 3 of the above. I forgot the actual terminology for that, but they don't say all of the above, but there's a 5th category. So again, it's depression, anxiety, mixed emotions, that is both, disturbance of conduct, and then all 3. It may be adjustment disorder with mixed emotions and disturbance of conduct. It's a little wordy, but it captures that 5th and final diagnostic entity.
Yeah, with mixed disturbance of emotions and contact.
There you go.
Mm.
Okay. All right, so now we have a 3rd. I mean, and the idea here, again, I don't want to over pathologize what's going on, but for teaching purposes, it's perfectly cool to do that. I don't know if the depersonalization, derealization disorder, or the narcissistic personality would account for a suicide attempt. So, we've had, and the most likely reason for him to present would have been the suicide attempt. So, we wouldn't be able to just ignore that. We have to address that in our treatment plan, and you can't address it in the treatment plan without diagnosing why it happened. So it's certainly related and comorbid to his feelings of derealization, but the extreme dysphoria as a result of that adjustment disorder with depressed mood is what resulted in his attempting to take his life. All right, any final thoughts on Phil? What other characters in Groundhog Day you want to talk about?
Very briefly, it was Ned. I found it interesting that he was very persistent on approaching Phil, like despite Phil's reaction, until Phil kind of like swapped the cards and was very forward first.
Mhm.
And then he like retreated very immediately.
Yeah, again, at first glance, I don't think there's much there because it is his job, right? Some of us, not all of us, tend to take our jobs outside of the office and continue with that persona. And if that's what Ned's doing, it does explain why he's so over the top and in Phil's face. However, what it doesn't explain is how that like acutely terminates when Phil acts differently and he himself is overly expressive. And how Ned just has a complete change in affect. That goes unexplained, and that does pique a psychiatrist's interest as to why that would happen. Anything else with Ned? We see him later in the movie too, right? Doesn't he go to the party? What are the characters? We have a little bit of time left. Rita? We just seen Rita.
She feel like she wanted someone that was like herself. I don't know. I found it very strange. Like he was clearly interested in her, and like throughout when he's in the beginning when he started like just saying like exactly like what she like stood for, whatever, she was like over the like whatever, and I was like, that's so interesting, like that she wants like herself in another person.
Yeah, that is interesting. Attraction could occur with people who compliment you. And I don't mean by saying nice words, I mean have traits that complement your traits. That's not the case for Rita. She certainly is much more comfortable with people who are similar to her. So here, like attracts like. We don't really, do we know much about her family? Did it ever come up? I mean, despite the fact that she doesn't remember anything from the day prior, um, her personality evolves significantly throughout this movie too. Like with him, you understand why, or at least have an idea as to why. I mean, he's learning from the recurrence of his Groundhog Day. But the same doesn't happen to her, yet she actually has a transformative journey as well, which is interesting. Anything to that? I have one idea, but it's a little trippy. I don't know if you guys are ready for it. I mean, you guys probably are, but that's a hint. And it kind of, and we'll close with this because it kind of just circles back to where we started the whole conversation with a comment that I made about personality theory and how there's like, 1,000 theorists that build these, well, it used to be textbooks, but ebooks.
Hmm.
I mean, despite the fact that she doesn't remember, I mean, that's cognitive processing, but maybe her unconscious does store these memories nonetheless. We really can't. I mean, as a psychiatrist, we cannot dismiss that, right? There's no way you can convince me that, oh, that can't be real. It's definitely real. And if that's the case, I'm just wondering if Groundhog Day, from Rita's perspective, is a fictional case or a fictional account of Jungian psychology, and maybe owes to her collective unconsciousness, so that she has got all these like past lives that are building up. It's kind of a little meta, but something to consider, especially from a Jungian perspective.
Interesting.
It was just sorry, as simple as like his like Phil's failed pursuits were where he was pushing and trying, whereas the end of the movie, she took an observational perspective and he met all or however many like of her personal criteria without pushing and trying, and so there was no reason for her. I think in the movie she was like, oh, would you speak to my friend, like how do you know this about me or something like that. And so it felt more like fate or something like that.
And that's probably really what happened. And I think if we had the writer producer here, the rest of soul, Harold Ramis would tell us, yeah, that's it. I'm still not gonna move off my position that this is very Jungian. Final thoughts, Groundhog Day. Anybody try to count how many times it occurred?
In the beginning, I started to, and then I like.
It's easy to lose count when he starts getting all well, whatever about his own existence. So it's easy to lose count.
Yeah.
Especially when you think in any of these like Groundhog Day type movies, when it just starts doing the whole cut comparison. It's like, do it this way, do it that way, do it this way.
And with that, was there any turning point in this movie? From Phil's perspective? But that's where our initial perspective was. You have to watch it again. Almost felt when he couldn't save the homeless man. Right? I mean, his need to save him and his failure really, I thought was a turning point in this movie. I think again, I have to rewatch. I think, but up to that scene, he was continuing to figure it out. That's being kind. Following that scene, I just think he was a different character. So I don't think we have enough time to get if that is true, and I'd have to look at it. It's again, see if my observation is accurate. But if it is, there's a whole nother conversation to have as to why. I mean, I think Again, getting Freudian, the tip of the iceberg is, well, it's clear, I mean, he couldn't save him, and that's true. But there's probably a whole lot under that surface too, that's for consideration as well. But another date, maybe next year. Yeah. All right, we're gonna sign off here. I can already tell you next week is Friday the 13th. Right, so that'll be fun. And offhand, I do not know the Seinfeld episode, but I will get it to the Twitter X group ASAP to post. So both the movie and the Seinfeld episode will be posted, if not later today, definitely by, well, it'll be later today. We'll get it up there. Final questions, final thoughts? We're good. All right, guys, thank you.